Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Alicia Moncada. I am a YU Indigenous woman from Venezuela, and I serve as Director of Advocacy and Communications of Cultural Survival, an Indigenous lead organization that have been working in Indigenous people's rights for over 50 years. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being interpreted in 4 languages: English, Bahasa, Portuguese, and Spanish. Please check your interpretation settings to select the channel in your language. This session is also being recorded, and we will share the recording with all registered participants after the event. If you have questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A section and not the chat, and we will address as many as we can at the end. And one small but important ask, please, for our speakers, we'll try to speak slowly for our interpreters. We have a wonderful team of interpreters working very hard in real time, and every second you give them makes a difference. So now let's begin. We are here today to talk about something that rarely makes headlines, but that's quietly reshaping the life of millions of people around the world, especially Indigenous people. We are talking about mining waste. When we talk about the green energy transition, about electric cars, about solar panels, wind turbines, the batteries that power our phones, the data centers, we tend to focus on what is being produced, but we rarely stop to ask what is left behind. So the answer for that is tailings. The leftover materials from mining processes, often laced with heavy metals and toxics, and we have to be very clear about that. These residues are stored in massive artificial dams that can stretch for kilometers. They are not temporary structures. They require maintenance forever in some cases, for thousands of years. And they fail. They have failed before with catastrophic consequences, especially for Indigenous peoples and nature. For instance, in 2015, the Fundão Dam in Mariana, Brazil, collapsed. Approximately 60 million cubic meters of toxic sludge poured into the River Doce. Villages disappeared, fisheries died, sacred sites were buried, and Indigenous communities are still living the consequences that are bringing us today to talk about tailings in this webinar. So what makes this especially urgent right now is that the demand for transitional minerals is accelerating. More extraction means more tailings. More tailings means more dams. More dams means more risk that this is disproportionately concentrated on the lands and territories of Indigenous peoples, who will rarely, if ever, ask for our consent for these operations. So that is the thread running through everything that we will discuss today: the absence of pre, prior, and informed consent, the gap between industry standards and lived reality, and the question of who bears the cost of transition that is supposed to benefit everyone. So today we have brought some of the most important voices on this issue. We will have Dr. Stephen Emmerman, that has testified on tailings before the U.S. Congress, the European Union, and the United Nations. He will give us the scientific foundations we need to understand the tailings. Edson Krenak is an Indigenous activist, a scholar, and cultural survival colleague of mine, very proud of having as a colleague, who is a person who lived the consequences of tailings in the Mariana collapse. And rather than stepping away, he stepped in all the way to the board of the Global Tailing Management Institute. that kind of presence informed by basically shape what we need, the movement needs. We have also Nur Hayati Humadi, an indigenous leader from Kawasi village, Indonesia, fighting on the front lines of nickel mining. And she will tell us what it means to defend your home and the last living places on this earth of nature. Cleonis Pankareru is, or Toa Kanina in the tradition of her people, is a healer, a guardian of the traditional knowledge in medicine from the Jequitinhonha Valley, Brazil, and she will share with us what mining waste has meant for her land and her ancestors' knowledge, and especially how it's affecting the plants that indigenous people use for medicine in her lands. And Jan Morrill from Earthworks, she's a senior expert in mining tailings, and she will give us the global picture where we stand in standards, regulations, and especially the gap between the promises of the corporate and the community reality. So I will ask everyone here today that is joining us, whether you are a journalist or a policymaker or an activist or a funder, to listen closely and not just for the technical information, but what it means for indigenous peoples, the earth, and other sentient beings, and even the climate emergency that we are living, the consequences of tailing, because behind every tailing dam is a community, but also nature, Mother Earth, and other sentient beings. Behind every statistic is a territory, is a way of life, a future for indigenous people, and also for other sentient beings that must be protected. So let's begin. We have our first speaker is Dr. Stephen Emmerman. Dr. Stephen Emmerman is, he doesn't deserve a little introduction. He has spent decades evaluating the environmental impact of large-scale industrial projects and has testified before the U.S. House of Representatives, the European Parliament, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and the UN Environment Assembly. He is also one of the authors of Safety First Guidelines for Responsible Mining Tailings Management. And Dr. Emmerman, the floor is yours now.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. You can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to the technical aspects of mine tailings. But we're going to start with this cover slide. This is in Jequitinhonha Valley in Minas Gerais, Brazil. We see a school and we see a filter tailing stack looming over that school, only 305 meters away. Okay, so thank you for that introduction. Okay, so this is the most important thing we need to know about modern mining, is that all of the ore deposits that remain in the world are very heavily depleted. If we look at this diagram on the upper left, we see middle of the 19th century, a typical copper deposit was like 25% copper. If we look at the lower diagram, we see in the middle of the 19th century, a typical gold deposit was something like 50 grams per ton. All of those ore deposits are long, long gone, okay? All of those very rich ore deposits we read about from ancient times, those are long, long gone, okay? The grades of the remaining ore deposits, copper 0.64%, nickel 0.82%, lithium 0.60%, remaining gold deposits average 0.8 grams per ton. So what happens to all the rest of the ore body after you remove this very scarce commodity? The remaining ore body becomes tailings. And we're not talking about a small part of the ore body. Literally, if you have a body of gold ore, once you remove the gold, you've got 99.9999% of that ore body remaining as tailings. Okay, so what exactly are these tailings? These are the wet and crushed rock particles plus chemical reagents, plus their reaction and degradation products that remain after the commodity of value, such as gold or lithium or nickel, has been removed. And typically, these tailings are permanently stored behind a dam constructed out of mine waste. There's an example from Brazil, a Mohuta Ouro mine, near Paracatu, largest gold mine in Brazil. Okay, now, so tailings are a kind of mine waste. The other kind of mine waste is what's called waste rock. So that's the rock that must be removed to reach the ore body. On average, for example, for every ton of lithium ore, you have to remove 5.53 tons of waste rock to get to that ore. Okay, so when we combine the tailings and the waste rock, we have the waste to metal ratio. And these ratios are not small. For gold, the waste to metal ratio is over 3 million. For copper, the waste to metal ratio is 513. For lithium, the waste to metal ratio is 1,634. Okay, so what is being produced by a modern industrial mine? The main product is toxic mine waste. Now, whatever is called the commodity is really a very minor subproduct. Okay, so what can go wrong with production of so much mine waste? The most dangerous thing that can go wrong is that you could have a catastrophic failure of the tailings storage facility. And I'll mention a few that were already mentioned by Alicia, but they bear repeating. On the left, Mount Poly Mine, British Columbia, Canada, August 4th, 2014, release of 24 million cubic meters of tailings with destruction of salmon habitat. In the middle, Samarco Mine, Mariana, Minas Gerais, Brazil, November 5th, 2015, release of 32 million cubic meters of tailings, 19 deaths. The tailings flowed for 637 kilometers until they emptied into the Atlantic Ocean. On the right, Corrego do Feijão Mine, Brumadinho, Minas Gerais, Brazil, January 25th, 2019, release of almost 10 million cubic meters of tailings, with 272 deaths, being 258 mine workers and 14 bystanders. Okay, now what's the main thing we need to know about tailings storage facilities? That they are permanent, okay? By contrast with what? By contrast, for example, with a water retention dam, like a dam for hydropower or flood storage. When these dams are no longer needed, or when they can no longer be maintained, they must be completely dismantled. They cannot simply be abandoned without maintenance, or they will collapse at an unpredictable time with consequences that are difficult to predict. This is the choice you have for any engineering structure, a bridge, a superhighway, a dam. You either maintain it or you dismantle it. But a tailings dam is different. Tailings dams can never be dismantled unless somehow the tailings can be moved to some other location. These tailings dams need to maintain the toxic tailings forever, in perpetuity. So that's the question. Are they going to be monitored, inspected, maintained, and reviewed forever? If not, all future generations will have to worry about the eventual collapse of the tailings dam, which is why people call tailings dams a curse on future generations. Okay, now, this is the official position of the mining industry as expressed in the Society for Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration Tailings Management Handbook. Okay, by the way, you'll see I'm being very careful in this presentation to quote industry sources or government sources rather than NGOs. Okay, so here's a quote from the very first chapter called What Are Tailings? The mining industry has a significant challenge in that these tailings storage facilities will last for perpetuity. Unfortunately, humans have no experience in designing facilities to last forever, so responsible tailings management is required for as long as the tailings storage facility exists. Okay, now the U.S. Forest Service has the same position. Okay, that tailings storage facilities require maintenance in perpetuity. Okay, this is from the December 2025 cover article in the journal Mining Engineering. The U.S. Forest Service recently conducted a risk assessment of a mine facility on National Forest System's lands using the failure modes and effects analysis methodology called FMEA. The FMEA showed recurrent natural processes such as wildfire, storm runoff, vegetation succession, slope creep, freeze-thaw cycling were the principal drivers behind eventual reclamation failure over an extended time horizon. This is due to the incremental degradation of individual component performance, leading to more acute non-performance and eventual system-wide breakdown. Now, the important part. The FMEA participants concluded that the natural processes that drove risk would always be present and would slowly degrade the reclaimed facilities over time. The only solution to maintaining system performance was a commitment to site care and maintenance, well, forever. There is no expiration date on reclamation integrity, and mining companies should recognize that their post-closure care and maintenance obligations may last far longer than they have currently planned for, and in some instances may be a forever proposition. That is the U.S. government position. Okay? Now, the world expert on tailings dams goes further. The world expert is Stephen Vick, who literally wrote the textbook, Planning, Design, and Analysis of Tailings Dams. He says we should just accept the fact that failure of a tailings dam is inevitable. Okay? This is what he says. He asks some questions and answers them. Over what duration should the closure design remain effective? Effectiveness is unlikely to be maintained much beyond 100 years. 2. How effective should it be? What system failure probability? System failure probabilities much less than 50-50 are unlikely to be achievable over performance periods greater than 100 years. And finally, what return period for design events is consistent with 1 and 2, even for return periods associated with maximum credible earthquake and probable maximum flood events? System failure probability approaches 1, that is 100%, after several hundred years. Okay, so what's he saying? He's saying under even the best circumstances, over 100 years, probability of failure, 50-50. Over several hundred years, just call it 100%. Okay, this is the accompanying conference paper, in which he flat out says, system failure must be accepted as inevitable. Tailings dam failure must be accepted as inevitable. Regardless of the return period selected for design events, the cumulative failure probability will approach 100%, for typical numbers of failure modes and durations. This has major implications. For closure conditions, the likelihood component of risk becomes unimportant, and only the consequence component matters. This counterintuitive result for closure differs so markedly from operating conditions that it bears repeating. In general, reducing failure likelihood during closure through more stringent design criteria or otherwise does not materially reduce risk, simply because there are too many opportunities for too many things to go wrong. In a statistical sense, all it can do is push failure farther out in time. System failure must be accepted as inevitable. That is the industry position, leaving reduction of failure consequences as the only effective strategy for risk reduction during closure. Now, I want to talk about, let me back up one. Sorry. Okay, let's get back to the screen. Here we go. Okay, I want to talk about two ideas that seem like they solve the problem, but they don't. The first is what is called decharacterization, okay? Now, this is really a term that comes out of Brazilian regulations. Decharacterization is not actually an English word. That's a direct translation of the Portuguese, okay? That seems like a good idea, but it doesn't mean what it sounds like, okay? Decharacterization does not necessarily mean removal of the tailings to a safe location and elimination of the dam, okay? This is what the Brazilian regulations say. They define stabilization, okay? The implementation of measures taken to ensure the long-term physical and chemical stability of structures remaining on site, Okay, that's what you do when you decharacterize. You make sure that tailings storage facility is now stable. Okay, trouble is that word stability is nowhere defined in Brazilian regulations. And for example, according to Vale, the owners of the tailings dam that failed at Brumadinho, the tailings dam at Brumadinho was, quote, stable, unquote, up until the moment of collapse, meaning the word stable actually does not mean anything to them. Okay. Second, am I missing a slide here? Am I missing a slide? Doot, 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 doot. I'm trying to back up. I feel like I must have lost a slide in there somewhere. Okay. So we have something called filter tailings, and that means you reduce the water content to about 15, 20, 25%, meaning that you can then compact the tailings in the tailings storage facility, which reduces the risk of liquefaction and catastrophic failure. That is a best practice, but it doesn't necessarily solve all the problems we're talking about. And that there have been failures of filter tailings storage facilities. And here's some recent examples just in the past couple of years from Brazil and Indonesia. Okay, so summarize with these take-home messages. The primary product of an industrial mine is mine waste, with the commodities as minor byproducts. Tailings storage facilities are permanent and require maintenance in perpetuity. Even with the intention of perpetual maintenance, catastrophic failure is inevitable. These last two things are said are official industry positions. Decharacterization does not necessarily solve the problem. Filter tailings technology also does not necessarily solve the problem. Okay, and thanks for listening. Last picture. That's the El Llagal tailings dam at the Barrick Pueblo Viejo gold mine in the Dominican Republic, looming over the community of Las Lagunas, only 1,135 meters away. And please feel free to contact me with any questions about mining tailings. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emmerman, for your amazing presentation. And don't forget that Dr. Emmerman is the author of the book, Safety First, Guidelines for Responsible Mine Tailings Management. For those who are interested in the scientific and technical aspect of tailings, this is a key book to add to your libraries. But don't go away, we have more to share. And our next speaker is Exxon Krenak. I'm proud to call Exxon my colleague. Exxon is an Indigenous author, an Indigenous activist, scholar, and writer of different books. He currently is completing his doctorate in legal anthropology at the University of Vienna. At Cultural Survival, where I belong, he leads our Brazil program, and he is supporting Indigenous and Quilombolas communities in their fight for rights and environmental justice. He is from one of the peoples affected by the Mariana Dam collapse, one of the worst tailing disasters in Brazil's history. Rather than stepping away, as I mentioned, Exxon came to fight against tailings. And Exxon, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Thank you, Dr. Steve Emmerman, for this lecture, these really informative and important points you shared with us. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation to the SIRGE team. And I have some slides to share here as well. Just a minute. Yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah, I think it is very now. Well, my presentation, I'll be discussing some aspects of tailings and transparency, consent, and why FPIC, the free prior informed consent, must extend across the life of a mine cycle and tailings as well. I will be speaking directly to indigenous communities and local communities impacted by tailings that live in the presence of tailings. First of all, as Alicia mentioned, I grew up surrounded by tailings. The dust, the smell, the noise, the fear, the everyday possibility of moving in the middle of the night because of any collapse and clash was part of my life or life of my family and relatives. Well, because of mining tailings, my family and the relatives had to move to the cities. They stopped being farmers, they stopped being hunters, they stopped being care takers and givers of the environment to become urban indigenous peoples. And that's why I wanted to focus here on the two things. Why it's important for indigenous peoples to engage in the advocacy in the context of tailings, and where what they can do, where they can conduct this work, and also the share a little bit the gaps and of the scenario. And that for that, I wanted to present very quickly, just remembering some cases, uh, the issue of right to information, and as I mentioned, what, how, and where indigenous peoples and the local communities can get support to conduct advocacy work. I will not be commenting on these cases because they are well known to everyone, but uh, the first case, three cases I'm highlight here, the Mariana case. The second one you're gonna see here, I will repeat some information here at the end, uh, at the bottom of your screen. Ecological and health issues remain unresolved along with their intergenerational consequences, as Dr. Steve and many others have highlighted in many studies. The second case of everybody knows, Brumadinho case impacted so many lives and the workers, local community, people lost not only houses, the river, the environment, the means of their livelihoods, but also their lives. And of course, ecological health issues may remain unresolved and these cursed consequences. The third case in Canada, it's remarkable because it's considered to be in a high income country and face the same consequences of tailings. And the same thing. And the lessons are no tailings, storage facility disaster expose a systemic failure in terms of community engagement, the free prior informed consent process, and risk communications. Why so many problems happens? I have here in front of you a list of claim tailings collections the last 10, 11 years. How many of them, the vast majority of them, are have the same problems, the lack of enough information, proper information, adequate information, and the free prior informed consent that is a right to indigenous communities, traditional communities. And you are seeing some images, some pictures here. This artwork comes from the SIRGE FPIC guide. And this problem with information has been highlighted by several articles, scientific articles. I'm highlighting one of them here on top, uh, showing that this article is from 2023. Current public disclosure systems and tails databases remain insufficient for community safety, FPIC guidance, and accountability. Many times we know communities, they are open to conduct a proper, in a good faith FPIC, but they lack information. The information is not appropriate. The information is not given in a proper way, even translated in the local language. Most of the documents or the things companies have been sharing on the internet or in their reports are in language that are foreign for these communities. And the conclusion of many of these studies are very similar. This one, for example, shares major disasters in Canada and Brazil, shed light on the absence of tailings risk disclosure. Another highlight here, the researchers found gaps that require improvements. All databases are incomplete as they do not disclose all types of facilities. Closed and abandoned facilities are ignored by 4 and 5 databases, respectively, which could reveal unreported risks. And if the researchers using their methodology, they can found that, imagine communities, local communities, indigenous peoples that they have to deal with their other impact of tailings, of mining, of the suppliers that live around them. Imagine how they are going to find this information. It's really a challenge that I wanted to bring to the communities, to the industry, for all of you who are working with research or civil society organizations, to pay attention to the right to know communities, indigenous communities, surrounded by these silent giants, which are tailings. They have to know. They have this right to know. The tailings are silent, but they are not sleeping. And then what I wanted to share now in these remaining minutes is what communities can do. Uh, First of all, I wanted to give you an overview. There is no lack of regulation, legislation, standards, etc., for mining, for tailings. We have here to assure, to guarantee indigenous people's rights, robust international legal frameworks. In Brazil, for example, Dr. Emmerman already mentioned some of them. Of course, they are not perfect, but they have been updated. We have here from 2023 national law. We have state law in 2025 last year, and also updates on resolutions to establish mandatory rules for safe tailings, to inform communities, to manage across the entire life cycle of the facility, and to give this information to communities. But this information, unfortunately, even though there is a framework, there is a legal uh, framework, as I said, to guarantee these rights of information to these communities, to guarantee the safety, they communities still cannot access this information, cannot use these rights they have. Oops, that's why I wanted to bring in here the Global Tailings Management Institute, in which I've been part for the last few months as a space of advocacy. The engagement ecosystem of the GTMI, it's really huge. Of course, most focusing on mining industry, the operators, the suppliers, the ones that responsible for tailings, but also other stakeholders, other entities and actors will be part of this institute, or the work is this institute must do. Indigenous communities enter there as rights holders. They have the right to know, to get the proper information, and they have also the opportunity to use this, as one of the directors said, we need to bring everyone's voice to the table. Use this opportunity to engage with these actors to guarantee the safety of their families, their communities, their environment. I would like to highlight here 4 things that indigenous communities can do. First is strengthen culturally appropriate risk communication and the free prior informed consent protocols. Many communities are producing their protocols, and to increase transparency, engage ways of engagement with actors, to share lessons learned, etc., and also bring into these protocols risk information published by the institute, because the institute actually was created by after these major clashes in Brazil, Brumadinho, Mariana. There was a global pressure to create a global industry standard on tailings management. And then the institute came to life to make sure that this global industry standard on tailings that my colleague Jen will talk more about this later, get implemented. The institute will guide companies not only to implement, but really to share information, to advocate for transparency, because information and transparency are game changers in this context. And also communities, indigenous communities and local communities can use the institute as partners to build capacity, to evaluate tailings, to use their reports to strengthen the auditing. Many times communities can get from the local authorities to do, the other partners to conduct that, and to expand what technicality really means in this context. Because if we hear in this context only the industry is speaking, if we listen only to the researchers, listen, the technicality will fall into industry standards. But communities, they have their own standards on livelihoods. Communities, they have their own needs, their own priorities, their own overviews on what is the territory, what is the land. They have to bring this concept of what technicality means for them. And of course, the institute also has a whistleblowing mechanism that can get stronger for communities to file complaints, for other actors to engage and to share concerns and also propose ways of remedy. And I believe, to conclude, I believe the GTMI can become really one of the major partners for indigenous communities and local communities to for advocacy, for corporate and legal engagement that can really bring justice to the tailings context and history. I count as a part of the board. I count on the indigenous communities, organizations, indigenous people's leaders. I count on civil society support to make sure that not only the institute does its good work, the work that has to be done, but also our voices are heard there in the way that they must be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Exa, for your amazing presentation and remind us, quoting your exact words, that tailings are silent but not sleepy. Our next guest is Nurayati Humadi from Indonesia. Nurayati is a community leader from Kawasi village, a community living on the front lines of the expansion of the mining, nickel mining. As you probably know, nickel is a critical strategic mineral for the energy transition, essential for the high performance ion lithium batteries in electric vehicles. So, Nurayati, we are honored to have you. Thank you for your courage and commitment with the rights of indigenous people and nature. Nurayati, the mic is yours.
Untuk tiling di Kawasi
For the
sini ya,
tailing in Kawasi,
bagi
in
masyarakat
our
Kawasi
area,
sangat
for the
khawatir
people
dengan
of Kawasi,
apa
the
yang
people are very
disiarkan
worried,
ya,
concerned regarding what
dari
Harita
desa Kawasi
is.
yang dinamakan sedimen pond.
They
Terus ada tempat-tempat
preparing
tailing
sediment pond and
yang
also their
diisikan
tailing
sama karyawan,
storage,
dan bahkan saya sudah lihat langsung
and
tempat-tempat tailing si
seen
Harita
with my
dulu.
own
Dan
eyes
begitu ketika
how
kita lihat
Harita
itu
has
sangat
built
menakutkan
this, and
karena
they look really scary
tempat
because
pembuangan mereka tailing, walaupun
the
tailing
tailing
ini
dam,
kering kata mereka,
although they say
tapi di
it
mana
is dry
posisinya
tailing,
itu di
but the position of
dulunya
the
sebelum
storage
Harita Group membongkar
before
hutan-hutan
Harita
Kawasi,
clear the
pembuangan
area
tailing kering mereka ini di mana
uh, to
kali-kali yang
dump their dry
sudah
tailing.
dialihkan Richard Group,
They
terus
move the rivers,
banyak posisinya itu di jalur-jalur air,
and the
sungai
position
ya,
is
sungai
actually
kecil-kecil yang jadi
in
pegunungan
streams, so
desa
small
Kawasi.
streams that
Ya.
actually
Kalau
went
untuk
through
dalam
our
Kawasi sendiri
village.
kami
So they
khawatir
move
dengan sedimen
the,
mereka yang katanya
the streams away to clear the
buat
area.
treatment
They say it's
tailing
for the
mereka atau
treatment of
limbah
the
mereka itu
tailing,
yang berada di dalam posisi desa
but
Kawasi. Ini
it is
sangat
in
menakutkan bagi
the
kami.
position is
Nanti
in
sedimen
the
pon
village
ini
of Kawasi, and
mengorbankan
it
tanah
is really
warga.
scary for us. And
Ada
people also lost
permasalahan
their
sebelum dibangun
land.
sedimen pon kan.
There was
Selain
problem
tanah yang
before
tidak
they built
dibayar,
the sediment pond,
adapun yang
and
dibayar
some
tapi di
land
bawah harga dan ada tidak
was not
dibayar
paid
dan
as
juga mengorbankan
it was supposed to
sagu-sagu
be.
kami
Some
ya
did not
di
get
mana makanan
enough
pokok
payment,
sehari-hari warga
and we also
Kawasi
lost
atau identik
our
dengan
place
Maluku
to
Utara itu identik dengan tanam ya
farm.
sagu dan itu
So
mengorbankan
we lost
mereka
sagu.
membangun sedimen
Sagu
pond
is
mereka
our
untuk
staple.
menyelamatkan tailing mereka. Harita grup sih, tapi bagi
But
kami untuk
Harita
Kawasi
said that
dan masyarakat Kawasi itu
it is going to be
tidak
used
menyenangkan
to save
karena
the community,
kami
but
percaya
actually the
yang namanya
tailing
buatan
dump,
manusia
the tailing storage
buatan dengan
is not
manusia
going to
itu
save us,
tidak akan
because we
bekerja
believe
karena sedimen pon
that
yang dibuat
what
Harita
is
ini
made
untuk
by humans is not going to stay forever
tailing mereka
safe.
atau sisa apa namanya
And the tailing
treatment
that they
mereka
dump,
ini
whatever
itu
treatment they have
kemarin
done to
sempat
it,
jebol di
it was
tahun
tailing dump
2023
facility failure
sama 2024 itu
in
2 tahun
2023 and
berturut-turut itu jebol
2024.
berulang-ulang kali dan
There was
sempat
failure,
banjir kemarin
and then there
itu
was
tidak
flood,
makan waktu 1 jam
and it was not
air
just 1 hour. It's more than that. It's
penuh dan ini
oh
sangat miris bagi kami
within
karena
only 1
pas
hour
dijebol
the
itu
water was already full,
mungkin
because
treatment
with
tailing mereka itu
I
terbawa
think
arus
the
dari banjir
even their treatment
kemarin
tools
ya dan itu
were
masuk di dalam des dan
flooded and then
banyak
washed
kos-kosan
into
warga
the
rumah
village,
warga
and then it hit
ketika
the houses
kami beraktivitas
in
di
our
dalam banjir
village.
ini kami merasa gatal
And
dan
during
akibat
the
dari
floods, we
kata
felt
orang di sini
itchy,
besek ya.
and people here usually like refer this like a
Apa
skin
saya
rash.
terus masih bercerita atau diterjemahkan dulu? Ya. Jadi
So
apa yang terjadi di Kawasi ini
what
sebenarnya sudah sangat
happened to
mengkhawatirkan. Belum lagi
Kawasi is so
uh,
concerning,
ada sedimen pon yang
and
hampir
there is
terhubung
sediment
dengan sungai
pond
Tuduku ya, di
which
mana hulu
is
sungai
connected
Tuduku itu
to
mereka jadikan
the
sampul
river
dan di
called
sini
River Duku,
dijadikan pintu untuk
and River Duku is
ketika
actually a kind of
namanya
door,
sedimen pon mereka itu penuh itu.
so that
Dan
when
ketika
their
ada
sediment
banjir
is
ini
full,
dimanfaatkan untuk
and
membuang
actually
tailing mereka atau
this
sungai Tuduku
this
sendiri
sediment
sudah dipakai untuk
is
semacam
sent to
pembuangan
the river. It's
tailing.
like they
Dan di
intentionally
sungai
connected
Tuduku ini kemarin kami
the
warga
pond to the
grup
river,
agar
and our people already asked Harita
perbaikan
so
di
that
mana setiap
they
banjir
can
itu
fix,
selalu sedimen pon
because every time there is flood,
jebol masuk ke sungai Tuduku
the
dan
sediments
membilas
will
ke
go into the river,
desa Kawasi kan
and then
sungai
it
ini tidak
also
jauh di luar
moves into
desa
the
Kawasi tapi
village as well, because
sungai ini tinggal di desa
the
Kawasi
river
dan ini
is inside
membuat
the
sangat
village,
kami sangat khawatir.
and we're really concerned about this.
Seharusnya Harita
I think Harita should
penanganannya
handle this matter
membuat warga aman, tapi
in such a way so that the
kita lihat
people feel
di
secure.
Kawasi ini seperti dibiarkan
Because
kami sudah
what is happening in Kawasi, it is like they
meminta
ignore what
pihak
is
Kadisduk
happening
untuk
here.
memperbaiki ini, tapi tidak ada
Although the
solusi sampai
people
sekarang. Dan pun kemarin
demand them to fix this,
sempat ke
Harita
tempat yang
has not done
ditunjukkan
anything.
bahwa di atas
And
sungai
I've been shown
jadi
by some
samping
children.
sungai Tuduku itu dibuat jalan masuk lagi, entah jalan
So
masuk warga
I
atau
noticed that there's a kind of
aktivitas
path,
alat berat Harita Group.
at
Saya
the
belum
group
masuk,
connecting
tapi
the
sudah
river
diberitahukan
and something
kemarin.
like to
Mereka
the
sangat
pond.
khawatir. Mereka
And
mengatakan kepada saya
we're
ketika
worried
nanti
whether
dibuat jalan
if there is a
pada
path
saat
or a
musim
street
hujan
there,
bisa-bisa di jalan ini
and if there is flood,
banjir bisa
this
masuk lagi dari
path
area-area tersebut karena dibuat jalan.
can let the water and
Ya.
then the floods get into our village too.
Tidak hanya itu, kemarin saya
Another thing,
menemukan
I also found out
ini tailing yang sudah
whether
terbuang
it
di
is
laut.
tailing
Tahu, saya bukan ahlinya, tapi saya sebagai masyarakat
tailing has been
yang
dumped
sering
into the ocean. I'm not sure. I'm not
sudah ada
I'm not an expert, but
sedimen pond yang dibuat
there
Harita
is
begitu
like
banyak.
sediment pond
Banyak
also
dialirkan ke kali.
near
Kemarin
the
waktu
river.
saya
That when I
pergi ke
looked
kecamatan,
around, I went
saya
to the
naik
district
speedboat.
office. I
Saya
took
temukan
a speedboat.
itu
I
ada
found
motoris atau
there was
tenaga kerja yang kerja
motorists
di
or
speedboat.
some workers who work in the
hujan
speedboat. They
di
throw
jangkar
the
tersebut
anchor,
terdapat
and I
di sini
found
kata
out
kami
the
besek
anchor
ya, tapi berwarna merah.
found
Apakah itu
besek,
tailing yang sudah terbuang di laut
perhaps,
atau
but
tidak, saya
it
bukan ahli.
is
Tapi saya
red.
bisa
I
jika
think probably it is tailing
menunjukkan
already
dokumentasinya, saya
dumped into the
bersedia dan saya
ocean.
sudah
I want
mendokumentasikan
to
itu, bahkan saya
get the
membuatnya
documentation,
membuangnya
and
di menyebarkan di
I have
TikTok.
spread it
Kalau tidak
in
salah saya
TikTok,
juga kirim di
and I
saya
think I
dengan
have sent
Jan.
to
Itu
Jan
terjadi
as well.
di
And
pantai, di
happened
dekat
in the ocean, in this shore,
bibir pantai desa
in
Kawasi.
the shore of Kawasi.
Dari besek-besek ini yang saya
And from this
dulu
kind of
sebenarnya
sediment, she called besek.
Kawasi tidak seperti itu. Apalagi di
In the
dekat bibir
past,
pantainya
we
tidak
never
ada becek seperti itu.
noticed this.
Saya menghabiskan
Ever
waktu kecil
have
saya
we seen
waktu
something
bermain
like
di
this?
pantai itu tidak pernah ada
When I was a
hal
kid, I
semacam
used to
itu
play
terjadi. Itu
at the shore, and it
di
never
dalam
happened.
di laut desa Kawasi. Nah,
We
ketika ada
saw
hari
pure sand.
mungkin tailing mereka ini
But
sudah
after Harita
jebol
came,
sekian lama karena setiap banjir
there was like
jebol atau
failure,
ada yang sengaja membuangnya
or maybe it is
sehingga
intentionally
di
dumped
di
there,
dasar laut desa
so that
Kawasi dan ini masih sangat dekat dengan
the sea
desa Kawasi
floor,
itu sudah sangat
so there is this kind of sediment,
kalau di
reddish sediment.
video itu ada
If you watch the
kain yang
video,
jatuh di
this
dasar laut
cloth,
terbawa
the
jangkar itu
sea floor,
lebih peras, itu merah sekali airnya, padahal di Kawasi tidak seperti itu.
and then when we squeeze the cloth,
Dan
it was
Harita
really red.
area
Now
sedimen
Harita
pond
has expanded the sediment pond,
sedimen pond ini bagi kami itu
and this
tidak
sediment pond
teratasi dengan baik, dan ini sangat
cannot be solved, not
kemarin
solved properly,
tawarkan ke
and it is really concerning.
bagaimana
And I
masalah
have
tailing ini
expressed to Harita.
menjadi alasan untuk desa Kawasi direvokasi.
They,
Karena
they
kami
they should not use this as an excuse.
melihat
Relocate the
tidak
people
ada
of
perbatasan antara
Kawasi.
perusahaan Harita Group dan juga desa Kawasi, tidak ada sama sekali. Kita hanya berjarak 100-200 meter.
Yeah,
Pun,
the distance
kita
is
pakai
around
jalannya,
100
ada
or
sungai
200
Tinggi
meters
di
between our
Kawasi,
village
kita
and
nggak ada
Harita
batas sama
activity.
sekali.
It's like
Oh,
there's no
Kami juga
distance.
mendengar isu-isu yang
We also heard some
tidak sedap,
issues
ya sering
are
diceritakan
concerning,
karyawan-karyawan
told by
yang
workers
enggan
there.
nama mereka, tapi karena
They
mereka
did not want
menyayangi kami orang
to
Kawasi,
tell their
mereka
names, but
sering katakan bahwa
their
tailings ini sebenarnya
Kawasi residents as
tidak
well.
terlalu diatasi dengan baik,
So
hanya
they said that the tailing is not
kasihan
really
air
taken care of.
Kawasi yang sekarang tinggal satu-satunya itu
And
air terjun
we are so
enggan
concerned
tidak
about
kami
the
konsumsi.
one
Sementara
water
di
source in
Kawasi sudah
Kawasi.
beberapa tahun ini
We
kami
are
harus
a bit
beli air
worried
karena ada yang
to consume the water,
masyarakat yang khawatir
and
dengan
we have
tailing,
to buy water
limbah yang sudah menyebar.
because we
Jadi,
know that
ada beberapa juga
the
dari kami,
toxin
dari
it's already
masyarakat desa
polluted,
Kawasi termasuk saya,
and in the
karena
village,
tidak
including
sanggup beli
me,
air,
because
jadi
I cannot
mau tak
afford
mau
buying water,
harus mengonsumsi air
so
tersebut.
I have to
Karena
consume the
sebenarnya
water,
saya sangat
the
khawatir
polluted water. Actually,
mengonsumsi
I'm
air
very
ini, tapi saya percaya bahwa
concerned
Tuhan selalu ada bersama
but
kami.
I believe that God will be with us.
Kami harus menjaga mata air kami
But
satu-satunya.
we
Karena
need
ini
to protect the
warisan
only
dari
water
leluhur
source
kami,
that we have in
kami
Kawasi. That's
yang
it is
membuka desa
our
Kawasi dari
ancestors.
zaman yang tidak enak sampai sekarang kami menikmati desa Kawasi.
They had opened this
Saya
village,
sendiri khawatir
and
anak-anak
yeah,
saya
now we
sering
stay here in this
mengonsumsi
village because of our
mata
ancestors.
air yang sebenarnya bagi kami sudah berubah
So
warna, sudah berubah
we also noticed that the water
rasanya sudah tidak seperti dulu.
is
Dulu air Kawasi
different
warna
color
bening
now.
gitu, warna
It's
rasanya
and it is also smelly.
seperti
It's
manis.
different. Long ago,
Ketika kita
the water
membuat teh,
tasted
kita tidak
sweet.
memerlukan
So when
banyak
we made tea back then, we did not
asinnya
need
sudah terasa, sudah
much
sedikit berubah
sugar.
warna ketika
But now it tastes a little bit
kita
salty.
membuat es atau
It is
es batu,
color.
dan saat kita ikat,
For example,
kita ikat itu
we make
terlihat dari kulit plastik air ini sudah
ice
sangat merah.
in plastic,
Mungkin sekian dulu dari
and the water looks red. So I
Thank you,
think that's all
Nurajati.
that I can say.
We are going to give the floor to another speaker. So thank you so much for your participation. And we have Cleonice. Next, we have Cleonice Pancaruru. Cleonice is from the Jequitinhonha Valley in Brazil, and we welcome her. She is a healer. She is also an activist, an Indigenous people's rights activist. She is a keeper of traditional medicine knowledge. So we are very honored to have her today. Cleonice, thank you for sharing your voice and your story with us today. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon.
Eu sou Cleonice Pancararu.
My name is Cleonice Pancararu. I'm an indigenous person from the Pancararu community, and we live here in the region of the Jequitinhonha Valley. My community is formed by two peoples, Pancararu and Pataxó. We are located by the riverside of the Jequitinhonha River. And I do not have a presentation in a slide deck for you, but I'd like to share my testimony about our reality, my testimony in life, what it's like for us indigenous people from the Jequitinhonha Valley, that we are a diversity of people, Tonkaru, Padishos, Aranyas. We do have the Mashakali people also wandering around the region among other peoples. And we are being deeply touched in many ways in our territory because of the lithium extraction and also other ores as well. But our lithium extraction is causing deep impact in us. Why? Because it's causing a deformation to our landscape. It is contaminating our water springs, water sources, the underground water. And this is also causing an impact in our ways of life, in our relationship with fauna, with flora, causing several imbalances and diseases, respiratory diseases, skin diseases, and gastrointestinal diseases as well. We do have here several piles of tailings. I did not hear about what was tailings. We have piles and piles of those. Causes lots of fear to us. Causes a lot of concern and worry close to traditional communities. Here we have a large number of traditional communities, quilombolas, fishermen, family farmers. So, for us here in our day-to-day situation, it is quite difficult to get by because we are in constant fear, especially when it is related to the defense and advocate of our territories. We are losing ground with great difficulty to regulate our territories. We do have traditional territories as well as many territories from a long history that our people always lived in the region of the Valley, Jequitinhonha, which is connected to the region of Bahia, the state of Pernambuco, because here it is the state of Minas Gerais. But for our people, this geographic matter of borderline, it doesn't say much to us because we know the territory without those borders of Bahia, Pernambuco, what is Minas Gerais. Our forefathers did not have that vision of the frontiers of borders because it is a free territory. Territory is free for us to walk around, for us to be settled in those territories whenever we feel well. And by the Jequitinhonha River, we built and we are building several things that we call them villages, communities that are practicing their tradition and that are advocating the space they're living in. The Jequitinhonha River, he goes to the Atlantic Ocean, and then he goes and lives, he flows into the sea and gives life to several communities and indigenous communities living in the riverine communities. Our kinsmen, Jequitinhonha rivers flow into the sea. It gets to the Tupinamba, Hanana, and several other communities. And the tailings, the mining tailings,
estão desaguando todos
the dry stack tailings, they are all flowing into the river and into the sea, and it causes contamination all over the place because river for us, it is a territory. A river is not simply just a water course. It is a habitable territory. It is a territory filled with life where we draw and collect our food. It is a space that provides for us a large number of food, a variety of food, like fish, a variety of different fish species, of aquatic species as well, plants, and also of our spirituality as well, of our culture. So we can see all of that been deeply negatively impacted because of this lithium mining. They said here that this mining was supposed to improve the weather situation. They said that was supposed to be sustainable mining, green mining. We did not understand quite well, but then we were about to grasp and understand its meaning. Simply to deceive us, to lure us, because they did not do any consultation, did not check our consent, because our friend Edison Krenak is here in our region as well, instructing and guiding us for us to have a right for free, previous, and informed consent to advocate our rights and our territories. Several communities here have no information uh, of what they should do to prevent. Many of them do not have access. They have their rights broken into pieces because they do not know where to claim for their right, where to file complaints. So we are calling the responsible entities, FUNAI, Indigenous Peoples Foundation, SESI, treating on indigenous health, and also the environmental bodies, even though that many times people do not hear us, people do not serve us, but we are standing against it and seeking for our rights that have been violated. We have a constitution in Brazil from 1988 guaranteeing and ensuring us indigenous peoples right to our organization, right to our territory. We can currently see that all of this right has been violated. Brazilian constitution is not being respected. We as peoples who are dwelling the Jequitinhonha Valley, which is in the news, in the media, as a space to be tapped because there's lithium and other ore that are quite strong in our region. And there's a lot of broadcasting and media and propaganda about this matter. The governor of the state of Minas Gerais and other congressmen are investing really heavily in our region. And we, as indigenous peoples and low traditional communities, we are always in a precarious situation, very in a difficult condition to get by, because we are always advocating our territories, waters, the water springs, our culture, our identity. We can see that on a daily basis, that this has been totally depleted. We do have a mining tailing stack in Poço Dantas, which is close to, we call it Ribeirão Piauí, which is the affluent of Jequitinhonha, which is totally and fully underground and contaminated. We see there's a tailing mountains and tailing stack where when they flow into the Piauí rivers and goes into the Jequitinhonha River and flows into the ocean in the Bom City in the Bahia, the Atlantic Ocean. That first is very worrying, very concerning because in Jequitinhonha Valley is a semi-arid region. There's not much of a rain. It is a very specific region where we call it transition region, where we see three biomes: Cerrado, Caatinga, Mata Atlântica. It's a very rich region in fauna, flora, in water, springs, but unfortunately, everything has been depleted. Several of those water bodies are drying up. Several mountains have been destroyed, so the change in our landscape is really drastic. Our natural mountains are turning into tailings stacks, contaminating the water sources to cause Sigma Mining Company, the main company here in the place, Sigma, Atlas, they chop down a bunch of trees. Because for us indigenous peoples, trees, it is a being with a right that must be respected. And the tree is not just a tree. A tree has a very important function, a role for the environment. Without trees, without vegetation, there's no rain. And then people they ask questions that it is to advocate for the weather, for the climatic changes. They say that it's for climatic changes, but the mining industry is causing this to happen. And for us, whenever they take down trees, whenever they destroy a diversity of living beings, because all of this territory is not just for ourselves, we human beings. There's a wide range of other living beings that are quite important as well. Without them, there's total destruction. So my take-home message and my testimony for you all, as a resident by the riverside of Jequitinhonha, that we feel quite worried and quite sad whenever we see our fauna, flora, our river sources and the water springs being depleted in such a mean way. And if we don't fight as we do now, our grandchildren, because I'm already a grandmother, so I'm really concerned with my grandchildren. What will be like their life? What will their lives be like? How can they live without water? How can they live without fauna and flora here in our region? So the Jequitinhonha Valley, it is there in the end, in one end of the economy, of industry, of lithium batteries because of the lithium extraction. And I'd like to share this testimony with you all, that the Jequitinhonha communities are here in the front line. We're fighting against and making sure that we can advocate for our territories, we can advocate for our water bodies, and the future of our children, of our grandchildren as well. That would be all. Thank you very much.
Obrigada, Cleonice. Thank you so much for your courage and to keep resisting and persisting the mining and the tailings impacts. As and I mentioned before, Cleonice is a keeper of the traditional medicine, a healer, and through her project, she is leading a living effort to recover and honor the ancestral knowledge of our indigenous people and sustains our communities. But this work is under threat. Mining tailings are destroying the very plants that makes this traditional knowledge possible. And if her work resonates with you, we invite you to support her project. Our next speaker is Jan Morrill. And I'm pleased to introduce Jan. She's an international mining senior management manager at Earthworks. And Jan has spent years working alongside communities around the world. We recognize her as an amazing ally for our indigenous people in the world, especially in Brazil and Dominican Republic, South Africa, and beyond. She has been working directly with affected communities, especially with dangerous mining waste facilities. She will help us also to understand what the data tell us, where regulations fall short, and what better standards could look alike. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I'm just going to share my screen here. And thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar today, and kudos to the SIRGE team for organizing it. So I'm going to start my presentation by just zooming out to underscore the urgency of tailing safety. And one piece I would like to highlight is that we don't know how many tailings dams there are, and we don't know where they are in the world. And that's because there's no comprehensive global registry of tailings dams around the globe. It's different experts have different estimates. So some say 20,000, some say 100,000. But in reality, we don't know how many tailings dams they are, where they are, and what their exact risk may be comprehensively across the board. And this is important because, as Steve pointed out in his presentation, we're producing more and more waste. It's estimated that mining companies are producing about 13 billion tons of tailings every year right now, and that is expected to increase to 2 trillion tons per year by 2050. And as we heard, tailings dams are failing globally with increasing frequency. And this disproportionately impacts Indigenous peoples and their territories because 64% of mines proposed for the energy transition are on or near Indigenous peoples' lands. So Indigenous peoples are close to areas where mining has historically happened, and colonization has historically promoted mining, and close to areas where mining is proposed to happen in the future. So as tailings dams are built, their impacts are felt disproportionately by Indigenous peoples, and as they fail, those impacts are felt there as well. So I want to zoom in and focus a bit on what can be done and what are the recommendations out there. So in 2020, Earthworks, together with other civil society organizations and academic experts on tailings, like Dr. Emmerman, published Safety First, Guidelines for Responsible Mine Tailings Management, which is a set of 17 guidelines that underscores best practice from the perspective of impacted communities, Indigenous peoples, workers, and civil society. And it's a set of 17 guidelines that has been endorsed by 164 frontline communities, tribal governments, labor unions, human rights and environmental organizations, and academics and experts. Those endorsers are spread out over 32 countries across the globe. And the guidelines follow the precautionary principle for tailing safety. So they say that it is incumbent on the mining company to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is not overwhelming evidence that the project will not have adverse consequences that are unacceptable to nearby communities or Indigenous peoples. And the guidelines are broken down into 4 buckets. One bucket is focused on technical guidelines for safety. So what are the most protective design criteria to avoid the loss of life? What are technologies that should be banned from being used because they're inherently more risky than others? What are buffer zones that should be established between tailings facilities and downstream communities so that they're not impacted? How should monitoring happen? What's needed for independent review? So those are all in the first kind of bucket of technical guidelines for safety. The second bucket focuses on participation and democracy. How are communities meaningfully engaged? What are the requirements for FPIC and free prior informed consent from Indigenous peoples? How are emergency management plans co-designed with communities so that they can inform those designs and understand what to do in an emergency? For example, the third bucket is on corporate accountability. So how should mining companies improve their internal systems to ensure tailings safety and ensure the protection of communities and the environment? So things like board composition or financial guarantees or other internal corporate guidelines. And then lastly, we have a bucket that focuses on transparency and access to information. So like Cleonisa was saying, we weren't consulted and we aren't heard. How do we push for guidelines where there is meaningful and consultation, where there's FPIC from Indigenous peoples, where access to documents regarding safety of tailings dams is made publicly available? And we say that communities should have the right to independent technical experts to help them understand those technical guidelines or those technical implications. Safety First calls for the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people across the life cycle of the tailings dam. So not just a check box exercise during the permitting phase, but throughout the continuous life cycle of the tailings facility. And that calls from the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that requires FPIC for hazardous waste disposal on Indigenous people territories. And lastly, Safety First acknowledges that the safest tailings facility is the one that is never built, right? So we need to look for ways to reduce the amount of tailings that we are producing. And one of the main ways to do that is to reduce overall demand for minerals and metals. We need to look towards circular economy solutions. We need to look towards demand reduction, especially in the global north, to be able to mine less so that we are producing less tailings. And how does Safety First, these 17 guidelines that we co-created with experts, civil society, impacted communities, how does it stack up against industry guidelines and regulation? So first, I'd like to talk about the global industry standard on tailings management. There were a number of questions that came through in the chat that I won't go into in detail, but this will kind of give you that high-level overview on those. So the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management was released in 2020, as Edson mentioned. It was the process was co-convened by a group of investors at Principles for Responsible Investment, the UN Environment Program, and the International Council on Metals and Mining, which is the Mining Industry Trade Association. We have at Earthworks have been quite critical of the GISTM, the standard. We think it is a good baseline. It's the first ever international standard. That is something to be applauded, but it doesn't go far enough to make the changes we need to really protect communities and the environment. And one of the reasons that is so is that the mining industry had an undue influence over the drafting of the standard, to the point where two of the authors of the standard wrote an expose book calling out the mining industry's role in the drafting of the standard after the standard was published. So on this slide, I have a comparison of the GISTM to the Safety First guidelines that were developed by civil society, communities, and other stakeholders and rights holders. And as you can see, the majority of the global industry of the Safety First guidelines are not represented in the global industry standard. The red X's mean there isn't alignment. The orange circle means some of it is covered, and the green check means that yes, this Safety First guideline is in the GISTM. And so only one of the Safety First guidelines is actually in the GISTM. So industry standards and that are being implemented right now still have a long way to go, as do tailings regulations around the world. Just going back to the GISTM, one thing to highlight, I really want to underscore what Edson said during his presentation, that the Tailings Institute is an opportunity for advocacy. So this standard lives in the Institute now. And we as civil society, Indigenous peoples, frontline communities will have an opportunity for advocacy in that institute to push for improved standards moving forward. And there is the multi-stakeholder board. And so really just want to underscore that opportunity exists and we can all engage. And then tailings regulations, so laws on the books in countries. We, together with Transport and Environment, Earthworks organized a review of tailings legislation in the EU, the US, Brazil, Indonesia, China, and South Africa, and benchmarked that against safety first. What we found was that overall mine waste legislation is weak globally, and there are significant risks that are not being addressed in regulation in most countries. We also found that most jurisdictions are not implementing their regulations the way that they are written, and that there are gaps between what is on paper and what is done in practice. So we called for, number one, governments to address those gaps and align with safety first, and also to start to create their own tailings dams registries on a national level, because we have no global registry, but countries should take the lead and the leadership to begin to document not only where are tailings dams, but what are the risks associated with them. And just to finish up, kind of underscoring regulation, examples of regulation in two of the countries we heard from Indigenous leaders today. In Brazil, as you can see in the previous slide, Brazil has, some of the closest alignment to safety first, but we did see that there is a lack of regulation and implementation when it comes to what's happening on the ground. And one clear example is the Brazilian government is not implementing federal tailings dam safety regulations for filtered tailings facilities. So like Pleonise was saying, there are these filtered tailings facilities that are impacting communities. They're not being regulated with federal tailings dam regulations. And then in Indonesia, what we've seen is there is no requirement for free, prior, informed consent from communities around mining. There's no legislation. And there are significant gaps in Indonesian regulation in terms of ensuring safe technologies, banning riskier practices, that have led to significant failures that have impacted people's lives and the environment, like we heard from Nuharati. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that was a little rushed as we're coming up to the end of the webinar, but I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jan. We are coming to the end of our time together, and sadly, we don't have time to respond all the questions, but I reckon that most of them have been answered already. But also, we invite you to check the materials of the SIRGE Coalition, and also materials that you can find about tailings in Earthworks and Cultural Survival webpage. But also, this conversation does not end here. And if you're a journalist, please share the stories that you heard here. If you're a policymaker, we ask you to close the gap, those gaps that today's conversation have made visible. If you're a funder, please resource the communities and organizations doing this work on the ground. And if you're an advocate, I think you know what to do. So I want to close with a heartfelt thank you to our incredible panel speakers today, and thank you to each of every one of you in the audience for showing up and choosing to engage with an issue that too often goes unseen. So thank you so much, Anaya Watse. Thank you, and see you later.